Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
I've been looking forward for so long to have an event in Bangalore, and it's intimidating though at the same time because so many of you knew Gauri well. I never had the privilege of meeting her, and so it's difficult to know what I could tell you that you don't already know. But something the three of us were talking about beforehand is that one of the things that fascinated me most about Gauri was that she was someone who really had such a complex life with many phases, many changes, and that even people who knew her well often knew maybe one side of her or several sides of her, but didn't always know the whole picture. And that's why it was such a privilege in writing this book to be able to speak to so many people who could speak to so many different sides of her at different moments in her life. And it's why I'm so grateful to have Shivsundar and Pushpamala here tonight, who both knew her in really distinct ways. And, many people who I spoke to when I was reporting this book, many of the people who knew her best told me that after her death, even they, were surprised at the outpouring in the streets that happened after she was killed. Of course, it was an enormous shock, and that was part of it. But even many of her closest loved ones were surprised, they told me, at just the sheer variety of people who came out in response to her murder and didn't actually know that she had connected with so many people. And that too was one of the things that interested me the most. And, I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved in writing this book. I'd been, reporting in South India for some years at that point, and I'd been spending a lot of time in Bangalore in particular. Not always because I had anything to do here, but just because I like Bangalore. And so I would just find excuses to come here, and my family and I would stay here for a month or two at a time while I was working on other things. And we were thinking of moving here at one point also. And I had just been here for a month, the month of August 2017, had just gone home to New York City when the news came about Gauri's death. I'd heard of Gauri, hadn't met her, but it immediately became international news that Gauri had been murdered. And I was just about to suggest to my editor at the New York Times Magazine that I write about it when she actually suggested it to me. And so it was interesting, it became such a big international news story that something quickly got lost, I think, about exactly who she is. Because immediately assumptions were made about why she was a significant person. And she's someone who, as you all know, is very well known in Bangalore. I realized over the course of reporting this book that everyone I knew in Bangalore had knew her and had met her and all had their own personal connections and moments with her. But outside of Bangalore, elsewhere in India and then internationally, there was a way of talking about her as if assuming that she'd been targeted because she was one of India's most prominent journalists. She wasn't one of India's most prominent journalists. She was actually quite a specifically local figure. And I think that's actually a lot to do with why she was important and also why she was dangerous. It's actually the local journalists who are writing not in English, but in all the many regional languages of India, who pose the biggest threat, who have the most direct connection with their readers, even when their audiences are small. They're the ones who are most often murdered. And And I came to see it as, is this understandable but kind of lazy assumption that Gauri's significance lay strictly in her profession. Because we tend to do that to people. We tend to reduce them to their job titles and think that that's what makes them special. I think there's a great deal about Gauri's journalism that was special and unique. And I get into that in a lot of detail in the book. But the way I came to see it is, what really touched me about Gauri and which really came to actually change my own life is the way that she lived her life and the lessons I think that she had to give about how to live a life. And in my mind, after spending years immersed in her life, what to me seemed most significant to me about her was, and unique about her, was her talent for friendship, her talent for connecting with people, her talent for creating community, her absolute refusal to hold a grudge, even as she was always willing to have a bitter argument, and her increasing over the course of her career, her increasing refusal to pretend to be neutral. And all those things had a huge influence, actually, on the course of my own life. And that, this is a book where I'm following an investigation. There's a mystery to be solved of who killed her and why, and that's in there. But to me, what really sustained me over the years of working on this book was the mystery of really how to live a life and the lessons that she gives us about how to live a life. And it made me examine myself, seeing her example of how she was able to cultivate and maintain so many different friendships with so many different kinds of people. It really made me reflect on my own approach to friendship and how I'd actually been neglecting my friendships. And what a rich and important part of my life I was abandoning. And it actually changed the way that I approach friendship. It also changed the way that I think about journalism. I was trained in a system where neutrality is one of the highest values, or at least the pretense of neutrality. I write most often for the New York Times Magazine, which the New York Times studiously presents itself as a neutral publication. But as anyone who reads it knows, it's anything but neutral. And pretending to be neutral is actually much more dangerous than the alternative. And Gauri really came to understand that. It was a journey that she took over the course of her life, where she was a much more in the 90s when she was a magazine reporter for big English language magazines. She was a much more conventional journalist in the same way that I've been a conventional journalist, writing with this pretense of neutrality. And once she took over her father's paper and started writing in Canada and became much more connected to the ground realities of the state that she lived in, she abandoned this pretense of neutrality. It had a huge influence on how I think. And I now make a point not to pretend to be neutral. I have opinions, we all do. I have a perspective. It's the whole reason I write, is not to present some sort of supposed objective set of facts, but to actually convey an idea. And I'm no longer willing to pretend otherwise, that I don't have a position, that I don't have a politics, and that I don't have something specific to say. And it's really thanks to Gauri's example that I've arrived at this place. Well, I'd really love for Shivsundar and Pushpamala to talk about their own experience in knowing Gauri and really, how you saw her change over time and what kind of effect she had on you in knowing her. Maybe Pushpamala, you could start.
Yeah, I'd like to start by complimenting you or congratulating you on the book, Rollo.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I've just read it. Apparently, it was released last year, but I didn't know about it. You didn't inform us. So I
Sorry.
just read it just before. I mean, I finished reading it yesterday, and it's brilliant. It's a brilliant book. And I'd also like to congratulate the publishers for publishing it in the first place and BIC for holding this event.
Absolutely.
So it's quite unusual. You know what the situation is like. So, I mean, everybody, there are a lot of quotations over here, and everyone says it's a thriller written in the form of a thriller. And of course it is, but actually it's not written like a taut thriller. It sort of meanders around. I mean, it builds up the case quite slowly, and it's got some absolutely hilarious bits actually. And right at the end, like the last 2, 3 chapters, then it becomes really taut when he's actually talking about the murder plan and all. It's very chilling actually. So I loved. I'll tell you about some of the parts I loved. One was this. The Pune police commissioner is supposedly investigating Dabolkar and Pansare's death. So he calls their spirits. So there's this whole paragraph. He or he gets somebody else to call the spirits. Sorry,
he hires a former policeman who'd reinvented himself as a spirit medium.
Yes. So they call Dabolkar spirit. And so it's so deliciously ironical because Dabolkar was fighting for, and Pansare were fighting for rationalism. And, and this guy, I mean, it's very funny, but I don't think it's as innocent as all that he's dumb. You forgot to mention actually in the chapter that the BJP was ruling Maharashtra. So the BJP government was there in Maharashtra at the time. So I think it's a kind of rigmarole and a kind of runaround. And there's this other chapter on the Sanatan Sanstha, and when he introduces it, I think I've marked it. It's because it's. I was fascinated by the aesthetic of Sanatan Sanstha's website, a soothing palette of soft pastel colors, every surface clean and smooth and bright, every face smiling beatifically, symmetrical and unblemished. Highlighted on the home page were the results of an experiment the group had conducted a month earlier, on December 7, 2017. Using an instrument called the Universal Thermoscanner, which looks like a pair of bright yellow ray guns with pink nozzles at the ends, a white gloved technician had taken a reading of Atavale's empty lunchbox in order to measure its aura. In a prose style that married the empirical and the metaphysical to a degree rarely found outside the literature of Scientology, the report concluded that the lunchbox's aura extended exactly 8.6 times wider than what then would be expected from an ordinary object. So that's the beginning of the chapter on the introduction to the Sanatan Sanstha. So, but of course, and then there's another bit that I really loved. It's a complete crazy, like, and kind of like seems like an aside. And that's when you take off on St. Thomas. So he starts off by saying that this, St. Thomas was assassinated, and this whole myth of him coming to India and so on. So he starts investigating this thing and goes round and round and round in Kerala and then Tamil Nadu and all that. And then then there comes this autobiography of him being married to a Malayali Christian and so on. And he says it's sort of, he's talking about it because it's related to Gauri's assassination, but actually it's nothing to do with Gauri's assassination. But what is very interesting is that it brings in this whole civilizational, thing. And so he situates Gauri in so many things that are happening. I mean, it goes back and forth in time, and especially in this St. Thomas part, because it goes to BC or something like that, and then down to the present and all the quarrels that are going on between the Syrian Christians and whatever, the whole situation today, and the Muslims and the Hindus and the political parties and so on. So it's got a, on the one hand, yes, it is very entertaining to read. It's really, I mean, I'm sorry, Gauri would have loved it actually, and she would have cackled, like hell about this, what I, quoted. She would have loved it. But it's not really like a thriller because it's much more ambitious than a thriller. So when we read a political thriller, it's got that taut kind of prose, and I think at the end and some parts there is that kind of prose. But what happens is that he's going round and round actually in a way, and that really, as I said, brings in this kind of civilizational kind of breadth about what really India is today.
Well, thank you so much, Pushpamala. I really appreciate that. It is a very digressive book, and I was determined to be digressive. Yeah, thank you. Shivsundar, maybe you could speak a little bit about your history with Gauri. And yeah.
First, I will talk my history with you. In fact, I met Rollo.
Either way, I answered anything.
Because just now he was telling that it is Rollo, not Rollo. But
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Kannada, I used to, it is ROLLO, it is Rollo.
Yeah, that seems fine.
In fact, I have been visiting, first of all, congratulations. It's a very fantastic book. And out of the 23 chapters, except for the 2 chapters, which is a digression about Masal Dosa and St. Thomas, other 21 chapters actually describes the 21 dimensions of Gauri Lankesh, if you can say so. Not 21, because some 8 chapters are about the trial and other things. But most of us have impressions about Gauri. I think many of the friends who are sitting in the hall, some are human rights activists who actually traveled along with Gauri. Some are actually revolutionary activists who Gauri helped to come open and be in the democratic mainstream. And some are friends who met her in the last 3 hours who met her. I think many of you are the characters in this book. I think many of you could speak well about Gauri. But the thing is, this give a this book gives a comprehensive understanding of Gauri in whatever way it is possible. Comprehension is a very relative term. You have looked at Gauri in what possible ways to look at her. So even to me, I had a intimate association with Gauri for more than say some 14 years. I first met her in 2002 when she had already taken over Lankesh, editorship of the Lankesh Patrike, which we realized she was only an employee when she was ousted because of covering the being sympathetic to the left wing extremism in 2006. But then the Gauri we saw was a different Gauri. And by 2017, September 5th, when she was actually assassinated, the Gauri who was in 2017 was completely different. To me, Gauri is a possibility of the transformation. To me, Gauri is a hope. To me, as an activist, because I have been in activism for more than 40 years, most of us activists actually are overtly, we actually work in the external sphere. We work for some values. But the larger question is how much values we assimilate into our personality. So that questions remain with activists of all kinds. But here Gauri stands out as a master. I should not say master. Take the female gender of the master in that sense. See, she actually assimilated the values. So I have seen from the close quarters how she evolved into a better human being an activist. We'll be activists fighting the enemies outside, but are we fighting the enemies within ourselves? So that she actually fought, and to give a anecdote or a kind of metaphor, she had a washroom in the office, and she was not allowing any others to use that washroom. A typical kind of urban thing, But by 2017, when we participated, in fact, there is another activist friend by name. Her name is also Gauri. She always cites this example. When she went for a agitation of Adivasis, in fact, there was a agitation against the eviction of the Adivasis. They were made to stay in a hotel room, and there were many Adivasis and women. So they came and used the washroom. And Gauri, that activist Gauri friend, cites an example where this Gauri was cleaning the washroom after they went out. That was the transformation, and that was the empathy and sympathy she actually developed. She was sympathetic, but her journey can be defined as a journey from sympathy to empathy. She became one of them. That transformation is really a hope, because your book, I think, in the paperback, had another subtitle which said Murder of Gauri when
Oh, in
the
the
rise of
U.S.
autocracy in
edition,
India.
the rise of
The
autocracy in
rise of
India.
that is missing in this book. I don't know why.
Yeah.
You may answer that later. Now it is mystery. That is what myth making.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is rise of autocracy. This another important contribution of this book is that it locates a phenomena called Gauri in an age where autocracy is in the rise. How could she actually battle? How could she take in? How could she fight it? How could she make friends on this line? So that is very important. I think that transformation in the age of rise of autocracy. You say it autocracy, I call it a pure fascism,
Yeah.
which we are saying today. So a possibility, a hope. So that's what I understand Gauri as.
Yeah. No, I agree. I call it fascism too. And I call it fascism in the US as well. It's been, this book came out before Trump came back in the US. And it's been alarming and unsettling to see that a lot of the patterns that I describe in the latter part of the book about the increasing grip of autocracy and the influence of fascism here has been played out in just such a similar playbook in the U.S. If anything, faster. If anything, he's going even faster. But that it is a playbook. It is a pattern, and these leaders are learning from each other. It's different different country, different subtitle. Oh, please do.
I should actually share this anecdote with you because that was a cultural shock to Rollo also. We also met once again in the court hall when the trial was on. And in the court hall, Rollo was sitting in a typical American way like this. And the assistant who was a clerk there asked him to get out of the court hall because he was sitting in this way. That was a cultural shock. And I should also tell the actual trial happened on that day. We can understand the courts of today. In fact, on that day, I think that was in the court hall number 1, principal judge of the Bangalore Magistrate Court was actually conducting the trial. The trial was of a construction worker. The construction worker narrated that he came back to his house at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and while he was having his food, he heard sounds of a pistol. And when he came out, he saw someone going away. What was the patisawal? That is cross-examination. The cross-examination was done by Vishwa Hindu Parishad advocate. He was asking that, when did you come back to your house? He said that I came back at 8 o'clock. What were you doing? I was having food. You had food without taking bath? How can you do that? That was one question he asked. How could you do that? And he could not even, that was given as a kind of evidence that he is saying false. He's lying. And I should also narrate you another, how Kavita Lankesh was tried in the.
Let me just interject to say also, when he made that joke, that the judge unfortunately laughed.
Yeah, judge laughed.
Yeah.
Actually. That you had food without taking bath was a kind of laugh, which I wrote later.
Yeah.
And Kavita Lankesh was in the witness box, and what is that? Patisala. Cross-examination of Kavita Lankesh was on the lines of, who is the father of your daughter? We were in Karnataka, there is an episode where one film actress has come out to have her child without getting married, and that has become a very scandalous issue today. Even in the court hall, one of the cross-examination was about, so you did get married? So that was very scandalous. That was even taken to the level of actually examining the veracity of the statement made by Kavita Lankesh. So this is the kind of court house even we have today. And those were all kind of shocks to Rollo.
Yeah. Could you actually, Shivsundar, you've been paying probably closer attention than anyone aside from Kavita about how the trial is progressing. Could you give us an update on where the trial is now? It started 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Actually, the conspirators who they arrested, 17 men, were mostly arrested 7 years ago, and the trial is still ongoing. Now they're all out on bail, right? Yeah.
See, the assassination happened on 2017, September 5th. The major breakthrough investigation happened in 2018, February. Between 2018 February and 2018 August, most of the accused were arrested. Some 17 were arrested and one was arrested later, and one is absconding even today. There were altogether 18 accused in the jail. And in 2018 November, a 10,000 page charge sheet has been filed already. Charge sheet has been filed in 2018 November. And the next stage is, Advocate Venkatesh is here, next stage is charging the accused, and the next stage should be trial. but the actual trial started in 2022 July. So there was a big delay of more than 4 years. That was used by the accused to obtain bail. How can you actually detain an accused without having trial was one of the major argument made by the accused. But such relief will be given to only right-wing people. You can see all the left-wing people without trial are languishing jails even today.
Yeah, Umar
Then,
Khalid.
yeah,
Bhima
Umar Khalid
Koregaon.
to Bhima Koregaon detainees, many Adivasis, and many 2020 rate accused people, they are bright students, etc. The prosecution has actually listed more than 430 witnesses and around 1,000 evidence. Out of 430, in fact, the prosecutor, Balan, who is a very eminent and also a very sympathetic lawyer to the cause of the people, has been conducting the trial. And now there are 80 more witnesses have to be, still undergo trial. And Balan is ready to forego one few more witnesses so that the trial can go faster. But in the meanwhile, between 2018 and 2024, the accused actually appealed to the High Court and the Supreme Court repeatedly asking for the relief because the trial will go on endlessly. So, and it is actually not natural justice to retain any accused without being undergoing trial for a long time because it applies to both left wing and the right wing. And even I think Gauri would have not liked the accused to retain in the prison. So that was taken as alibi, and now all the 17 are out on bail, and the trial is going on. And the major demand by the Friends of Gauri Memorial Trust, and the larger public is to constitute a special court to actually conduct the trial on a regular basis. It so happens that the in charge judge, he is also in charge of the administrative duties. Hardly he can give time for the regular trial. This is a special trial, and hardly this trial takes at least at the maximum 4 to 5 days in a month. So Balan was telling me today that this month hardly one witness could be taken for trial, and there is also this counter questioning that happens later. So this goes on. So meanwhile, there are already reports that these accused are already threatening the witnesses. So we have been demanding to constitute a special court. So it is unjust to say that the accused are in the prison without trial, but you conduct the trial and punish them.
Yeah, and some witnesses have turned hostile. Yeah,
few out of say up to now some 300 witnesses have been tried, out of which some 10 are turned hostile.
Okay.
The rest of them are giving.
And months ago, the chief minister, Siddharamaiah, said that the trial would be fast-tracked. Never happened. Why do you think that is? I mean, he was actually a personal friend of Gauri's.
I was told that we are informed that even Gauri Lankesh made a petition. That petition has been forwarded to the High Court. The High Court has to take action. But the High Court, I am informed that a letter is written back to the government saying that there cannot be a privilege given to a particular case of a special trial court because so many cases are already languishing in the court. There cannot be a special treatment to a accused because of her social status.
Yeah.
That is the reply given by the High Court.
Yeah.
So now that option is also not much there, but we have to pursue.
Yeah. Pushpamala, I'd love to hear, I know you have a lot of anecdotes of your experience with Gauri that I'd love to hear from you to illustrate some of these other sides of Gauri.
I think I'll talk a bit about how I knew when we met and how we knew each other. Actually, I knew Gauri's father, Lankesh, from the 1970s. When I was a kid, like just out of college, I was in the first year PUC or second year PUC, I think. I acted in a play that he directed. I used to go and hang around in Central College, and I was part of this very rowdy gang of people, who used to just... But at that time, the English department was very famous. So T.G. Vaidyanathan was there. In fact, this group was around TGV, as he was called, and then there was Lankesh, who were the two famous people, but also the Vimla Rao was there and so on. I think Lankesh was also around that time made his first film, Pallavi. So I heard the story that they couldn't afford to, there's some scene in which people had to be served food, and so Vimla Rao did the costumes and also organized the food where they mixed mud and water, I think, and served it as saru. So Anyway, all this was going on, but he directed a play called Lysistrata, not like based on Lysistrata by Aristophanes, and it was called Sri Bandaya. So I was one of the extras actually. I didn't have a main role, but a whole lot of us young kids were there, and then it was full of foul language in Kannada which we didn't know, we didn't understand. So after that, some relative complained to my father, so I was banned from acting. So I knew, and Lankesh also used to come. We had a friend in Baswangudi. They lived in Baswangudi. I also grew up there. I'm also from Baswangudi, the same area, but we didn't know each other. But I knew Lankesh because he also used to come and play badminton in this ex-cricketer called K. Srinivasan. He had this kind of place which is a kind of adda where all the writers used to hang out. So a lot of writers used to come there every evening and have a drink and all that. And Lankesh used to come. In fact, he used to come with Chidanand Rajgata, who was a skinny young guy at that time. I think he was still a student, and they used to come and play badminton. He used to play it in his dhoti. But I got to know when about 20 years later in the 1990s, I built my studio in Rajarajeshwari Nagar, which was this kind of at the edge of Bangalore. It was out of the BBMP limits actually, and there's nothing there. Like there's just a few buildings, and so this K. Srinivasan, our friend, who was called Balaji, he said, "Oh, you're going to Rajarajeshwari Nagar, you get to contact Gauri and Kavita, And I'd never, the Lankesh's daughter's, Lankesh's daughter's house is there. So actually, when I moved in 1996, Gauri was in Paris for a year. So I never met her, but Kavita was staying in her house, for that 1 year. I think she was building her place in Padmanabhapuram, and she was living in Gauri's place at the time. So when Gauri, and by the way, Kavita is much more sort of restrained and, than Gauri. Gauri is much more sociable and friendly. So when Gauri came, we immediately became friends, So we started hanging out together a lot, and we were practically neighbors. She lived 2 roads away from my place. And there are all these funny things like, we used to have a lot of parties because nobody used to visit us otherwise, So we had to throw a party. And so she had very different friends from mine. And so we got to know each other's friends and so on. So there was, in fact, I think you've quoted this in your book. And I've also written about it. I've written a piece on Gauri, which was published actually. And how in one party I had an accident and had broken my leg. So I had this kind of full leg plaster, So, but I wanted to go so I went for the party on crutches. And so I was standing on one leg and dancing. So there are all these funny things. I met a lot of the writers, she knew all the writers. And their children were her friends, like Anantamuti's children and, whatever, Vivek Shanbag and so on. I think Chandan I met much later, who's also an R.R. Nagar kind of denizen. So they're very funny. Like she was, even up, so when at that time in the 1990s, like she was not at all political, and I think after that she went off to Delhi and she was working for TV, for Enadu TV. It had just begun. So she was having a great time in Delhi and all that. But she had to come back when she came back when Lankesh died. He suddenly died. Nobody expected it, and Lankesh Patrike was broke. I think it was in debt or something because Lankesh was very principled and he never used any ads, which Gauri followed that later on. When she took over the paper, so they only survived on subscriptions, sales actually. And it was so popular. I remember, like, I used to get it, and Lankesh has also written about me in one of the Lankesh Patrikas.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yes, in his editorial, because I went to him asking for some donation. I was organizing a public art project, and I went to his place, and I said, "Give me 5,000 rupees." So he tried to give me a lecture and said, "No, no, nonsense. Like you shouldn't build anything. I don't believe in sculpture. I don't believe in all this public art." And then he quoted the Sharanas and he said, like, you shouldn't build anything permanent. I said, no, these are installations. They will be pulled down. They only last for like, for about 10 days or something like that. So anyway, he was very generous actually. He gave me 5,000 bucks. So, and he wrote about
because
it.
he knew it would be torn down.
No, he tried to wriggle out of it. So I was very friendly with him actually. I'd known him for a long time, and he was very accessible. Actually, I just walked into his Lankesh Patrika office and I said, "Give me 5,000 rupees." So, and he did. So he wrote about it in one of his editorials. So I loved Lankesh Patrike because he didn't have a in-house style. So and I had not studied Kannada much, but I'd learnt it on my own. So I really enjoyed all these little these different columns that he had, which had every kind of Kannada. From classical Kannada to slang, literary Kannada, then Dharwad Kannada, then he had this Chandre Gowda used to hilarious in rural Kannada used to write these kind of columns and so on, so this. But what have and then it was so popular that it was also I'm talking about the language because it was people were delighted by this phenomenon. And I remember my friend Madhav Prasad, who's a film theorist. He was in Calcutta. He used to get the Lankesh Patrike over there. And we were once talking about it. He said, like, he just changed Kannada. He said, suddenly, there's this issue. And then the title of that issue is Bam Gum Yuddha. So that was Bangarappa and Gundura. So it was very slangy, and this kind of very, just playing with words and all that. So anyway, when Gauri came down, I think everybody persuaded her not to take up the paper. But there are all these. It was heavily in debt, and they could not afford to pay uh, the salaries of the staff over there, even for that month. But I think, she wanted to do it because she adored her father. In fact, apparently Chidanand Rajgata's famous line is, there are always three people in the bed with us, So she was adored, both Kavita and she adored their father, They thought he was the most handsome guy. And of course, he was incorrigible, but he was also very supportive. And he was, of course, a major figure and a major, not only writer, but filmmaker as well as, a journalist and editor and very influential figure. So when she came on, I think, as you said, first of all, she didn't know, she had never written in Kannada. She was an English journalist. And I don't believe when, you've quoted Chidanand as saying that she was deracinated and all that. I mean, I think that's all rubbish. Just because you don't write in Kannada doesn't mean you're deracinated. But also in the 90s, I don't believe she was not an atheist, because in her house, next to the kitchen, there was this storeroom with, these typical kind of stone shelves. And she had a little puja space over there. I mean, there was a lingam over there, a small linga, and some other objects, the lingayat sort of objects. She was the first lingayat I knew well, and seemed to be worshipped with the flowers and all that. And I have a feeling she also wore this string, like the holy thread that they wear around the waist, at that time. I'm not sure, but definitely this was there in the storeroom, like a little puja thing. So I think, as you've written in the book, most of the journalists left when she entered because they just didn't take her seriously. And frankly, she was not really taken seriously as a journalist by anyone. So she had to struggle a lot to start writing in Kannada. And in fact, it sounded odd. I think because people were so used to Lankesh's sort of writing,